When we're using PHP in order to run queries on the database, we have a few lines of code that we need to get our head around. When we're selecting all records from the database table, we don't need to have any prior information because we're not selecting some records or we're not selecting one record. When we are selecting some records, when we are selecting one record, when we are inserting a record, when we're updating a record, and when we're deleting a record, we need to know which record or records we're dealing with. So we already need some information before we can run the query. Okay, so select all is in some ways the simplest because you don't need any previous information. You don't have a select all where. Okay, it's just a select all records. Okay, so 6 or 7 lines is what we need. So for example, let's go to our code, and if we go to index, and this is the index on house cell, let's just work our way through the PHP here. Okay, we've got a require once for the connection code. We've got includes for the header and nav. And then what we want to do on this page, and let me just show you this page. That's it here. Okay, we want to pull all the records from the product table and display them inside these divs with the kind of double line border, one div per record. So what is involved with the code? Okay, we are going to put the code in this area here. Okay, in the resources, insert PHP code block 1 here. So let me just talk through that. What does that look like? It's a select all, so we need our SQL query. Okay, so that's the first thing we're going to need, a line like that, our query, and we just create a PHP variable. Usually we just call it $query. If we have more than one SQL query on a web page, we call it query $query1, $query2 for the next query, and so on. So that's what's going on here. There's the table name, and we're selecting every field for every single record here. Okay, so what do we need to do? We need to create a prepared statement. That's what this line is doing here. And what we need to do here is we need to tell the server where is the product table. Okay, and we know the product tables can't exist on their own in PHP-MyAdmin. Tables have to be inside a database. So what we need to do is we need to link our query, okay, with our connection code. And if you remember, in our connection code, we created a PHP data object called $db, which stores localhost, the DB name, the username, and the password. Okay, so $statement then is this sort of giant complicated variable that is storing both the query on the one hand, but also the database connection information as well. Okay, because we are selecting all records, we don't need to worry about getting some information from the user, because when the user is typing information in to be used in an SQL query, there's a potential of what's called an SQL injection attack. So I'll talk about that in a little while, but we don't have that issue when we're doing a select all. Okay, so we can actually run or just execute our prepared statement then. Okay, which is what that line does. So that line is going to execute our query, which is a select all. And what does select all do? It selects all records. So all the records are going to be brought back, and then we need to start thinking then about, okay, if all our records are coming back, all our fields in each record, all the data in each field in each record, that's a heck of a lot of data, of information. So we need to store that somewhere, and what we're going to do is we are going to get all those records, okay, which is what the fetch all does. And okay, so we fetch all the records based on the statement. That's essentially what the arrow that means there. Okay, so we run a fetch all PHP command based on our statement variable, our prepared statement. Okay, and we put the results into this variable called $allQueries1. Okay, so notice query1, $allQueries1, just to be consistent. And when we've that done, we end up with all of the records from this table being stored in this variable here called $allQueries1. Okay, and this is a complicated array. It's a 2D array. We'll talk about that in a wee while, but I don't want to get bogged down in that for the moment. We'll come back to that. And then we've ran our query. We have finished with our connection to the database at the moment. Okay, so we just end that by using the close cursor PHP command on our statement. So we're finished that. By running this, that means we can use $statement again in another query later on the page. So if I scroll down here, you can see I'm using $statement down here from a different table, from the customer table this time. Okay, so that's what that code is all about. Now, okay, we have a couple more lines involved with our other queries. Okay, so essentially, what have we got? We've got a select, and then we can think of the select in three ways. We're selecting all records, we're selecting some records, and we're selecting one record. And then we've got our other three queries in relation to records. Okay, insert, update, delete. So we are not doing any alter table here. It just wouldn't be an efficient way to do that, to add columns or change the data type. The easiest way is the administrator would just go into PHP MyAdmin and do that work there. The ordinary user would certainly not be maintaining or adjusting the database metadata. So insert, update, delete. So let's just come down here. What have we got here? Here we've got examples of various SQL queries here, $query1, $query, whatever, select, insert, update, delete. Come back and look at this code with all these funny colons in a second. So that's the first line. The second line, then, we need to create a prepared statement that is linking our database for parameters with our SQL query. That's what that line does. If we are selecting some records, selecting one record, inserting, updating, and deleting. Okay, in those 5 cases, we will probably have information from a previous database table, or sorry, a previous PHP page. Okay, for example, we're inserting a record, we need to get all the data from a form. Click on the submit button, and then we're going to insert the data. Okay, so the second page does that. For update, we need to pick a record to update. We will be retrieving all the data from that record, so that's going to be a select one. That's probably going to go into text boxes and so on, form elements, and then we might make changes on those, and then we're going to update. Okay, so we're updating using data we have previous to pressing the submit button. Similarly with insert, similarly with select some, select one. Which record? Okay, we have to use a form in order to filter, help us filter the records. And finally delete. Okay, what record are we deleting? So we need to know that before we can run the query. So in all those cases, okay, we have information probably coming from text boxes, radio buttons, selection lists on a form on a previous web page. Okay, and that creates a problem because the user could type something like drop database D00 whatever semicolon. If the user types that in a text box, we do not want that SQL command to be carried out. So the only way that SQL command will be carried out is if the semicolon is regarded by PHP as a real semicolon. So what we need to do is essentially we need to make sure that semicolons, this is a bit simplifying, but we need to make sure the semicolons are not regarded as semicolons. So we want to basically convert characters like that to more harmless codes. So this is called sanitization. Okay, so we want to sanitize any value from a form element. Okay, so we use bind value. So what bind value does is it binds, or it links characters like semicolons and replaces them. It links them to harmless codes. Okay, so how do we do that? For each piece of information, for each value from a form element that we have from the previous page, for example here, which product, we might have primary key from a selection list option on a previous page. Okay, we want to pick a product, so you selection list, you pick a particular product, the value could be the primary key of the product. Okay, we want to take that value and we want to make it harmless. So how do we do that? We just add in dollar statement, arrow, bind value, and then whatever it is that we want to sanitize, we put that in the second half here after the comma. And then what we're going to call it when we have it sanitized, we put to the left of the comma. Okay, and typically what we do is we take the word after the dollar, we use the same spelling here, we put a colon in front of it, and we put that inside quotation marks. Okay, so if I have 10 form elements, say I'm going to insert a record, I need 10 of these lines. Okay, we don't need that if we're doing select all. That's the end of it here. Otherwise, we do need it. We want to execute our statement. That would be true for all 4 SQL query types. Okay, if we are querying for one record, we're only going to get one record back. So we could use fetch in that case. Okay, if we are selecting all records or some records, i.e. more than one record, we would use fetch all. Okay, if we are using insert, update, delete, we don't need a fetch or a fetch all. And then finally this line here, close cursor. When we're finished, the link between the SQL query and the database connection, we use that. So this is the guts of our code, and it's a matter just essentially of using the correct number of lines. Okay, we're either going to have 5 or 6 of those 7 lines in use. So it's a matter 1, 2, 4. Let me get this right. 1, 2, 4, and 7 are always used. Okay, so we always need an SQL query. We always need to create a prepare statement. We don't necessarily need number 3. We always need to execute, and we always need to end the link, close cursor.